The Saturn Cube Cult, written and narrated by Graham Leggett. The Saturn Cube Cult, the silent architects of control. There exists a hidden order, a network of elite groups, institutions, and esoteric societies that have, for centuries, operated behind the veil of human civilization. While they go by many names, their core ideology remains the same: the veneration of Saturn, the worship of Kronos, and the control of humanity through the illusion of time, duality, and recursion. The Saturn Cube Cult is not a singular organization, but a collection of interwoven factions, financial empires, religious sects, and power structures that collectively enforce a system designed to maintain humanity in a perpetual state of confinement, not just physically, but mentally, spiritually, and existentially. This system is not random, it is designed. It is a construct built to sustain the illusion of linearity, scarcity, and control, ensuring that the vast majority of people never awaken to their own divine spark. At its core, the Saturn cult is a priesthood of timekeepers, gatekeepers of perception, and manipulators of recursive thought. They maintain the boundaries of the dream, the walls of the cube, the prison of belief itself. But even they do not fully understand what they have built. Saturn, Kronos, and the symbolism of the cube. To understand the Saturn Cube Cult, one must first understand Saturn and Kronos, where we get our word chronology from, the deities they venerate, and the metaphysical principles they represent. Saturn, the planet of limitation and control. In astrology, Saturn is the planet of structure, law, time, and restriction. It represents the barriers of material reality, the laws that define physical existence, and the force that imposes order upon chaos. Saturn rules over governments, institutions, and hierarchies, the systems that dictate human life from birth to death. But Saturn is also the planet of karma and suffering, the teacher that enforces discipline through struggle. It is the hand that punishes, binds, and restricts, ensuring that nothing escapes its grasp. This is why the elite revere Saturn, because they seek to emulate its power. Kronos, the devourer of time. In mythology, Kronos is Saturn personified, the god of time, entropy, and cycles. He is the Titan who devoured his own children, fearing they would surpass him. He is the force that ensures all things decay, all things perish, and all things remain bound within the cycle of birth and death. The Saturn cult worships Kronos not as a myth, but as a principle, the very principle that governs reality itself. They structure their world around false urgency, artificial scarcity, and the perpetual fear of time running out. Fear of death, aging, and impermanence ensures that people remain attached to their mortality. Debt-based economies ensure that people remain enslaved to an ever-moving clock. Historical revisionism ensures that time itself can be rewritten to serve those in power. Education systems designed to enforce linear progression ensure that individuals see life as a step-by-step process rather than a fractal unfolding, keeping them locked into preordained career paths, societal roles, and institutionalized thinking. Artificial work schedules and the 9-to-5 cycle reinforce the illusion that time must be traded for survival, ensuring that people remain too occupied with survival to contemplate their own existence beyond the imposed framework. Time as we perceive it is not objective, it is a construct. And the Saturn Cube Cult exists to maintain that construct. The cube is one of the most ancient and pervasive symbols of Saturnian control. It appears in every major religious, financial, and technological system that governs modern life. Circling the cube, the Kaaba and ritualized recursion. One of the most striking examples of the Black Cube cult's influence is the Kaaba in Mecca, the holiest site in Islam. The Kaaba is a massive black cube standing at the center of Islam's most sacred ritual, the Hajj. During Hajj, millions of worshippers circle the Kaaba in a counterclockwise motion. This act is known as tawaf and is performed 7 times around the circle. Symbolism of the ritual. The circling around the cube mimics orbital recursion, much like the planets, including Saturn, orbit the Sun. The 7 revolutions mirror the 7 classical planets, reinforcing the astrological binding of human consciousness within planetary influence. The act of moving in a circle represents circular logic, a loop that has no beginning or end, reinforcing the perception that one is always seeking but never truly arriving. The cube maintains at the center, unchanging, immovable, dictating the movement of those around it. In essence, the ritual of tawaf around the Kaaba is a physical representation of the recursive cycle, the idea that the masses move in predictable, controlled patterns around an unchanging structure. It is not a direct expression of evil, but it is an ancient form of binding consciousness within a cosmic order that remains unseen to most. Other black cube locations and their influence. Beyond Mecca, the black cube appears globally in religious, corporate, and institutional spaces, reinforcing the Saturnian principle of containment and restriction. Religious and occult uses of the cube. The tefillin in Judaism. Orthodox Jewish men wear a small black cube around their forehead during prayer, binding scriptures, words of the law, inside it. This symbolizes the binding of divine law into the mind, ensuring strict adherence to the doctrine. The black stone of the Kaaba. Embedded in the Kaaba itself is another mysterious black stone, another symbol of Saturnian worship, much like the Philosopher's Stone or the lapis elixis, which represents the concentration of divine energy into a single immovable object. The Yod in Kabbalah, the Tree of Life. The Kabbalistic tradition uses the cube as a symbol of Malkuth, the material world, representing the lowest, most confined state of being. Freemasonry's perfect ashlar. The black cube appears in Freemasonry as the perfect ashlar, symbolizing a perfected, controlled mind, one that has been shaped by external forces rather than being self-authored. The black cube in corporate and technological power structures. Beyond religious symbolism, the cube has permeated modern industry, finance, and technology, subtly reinforcing control mechanisms at a subconscious level. Saturn Cube sculptures. Large black cubes have been erected in major financial and political centers, such as New York, Astor Place, Manhattan, Melbourne, Australia, Copenhagen, Denmark, and Santa Ana, California. These cubes stand as silent monoliths, subtly imprinting Saturnian energy into the urban landscapes. Quantum computing and the Saturnian cube, the lock and the key. Quantum computing seeks to break the limitations of classical computation, accessing a realm where binary constraints dissolve into quantum superposition. Quantum computing does not merely improve upon classical computing. It fundamentally alters the nature of computation itself, shifting from rigid binary logic to a fluid, probabilistic reality. In this sense, it mirrors the esoteric duality of Saturnian cube, which is both a prison and a portal, both the limit and the key to breaking limits. The fact that major quantum computing companies, D-Wave, IBM, Google, and others, encapsulate their quantum processors in a black cubic enclosure suggests something deeper, a symbolic resonance with the principles of containment, controlled chaos, and structured transcendence. The Saturnian cube as the lock and key. The black cube of Saturn has always represented order, control, and the inescapable structure of reality, often depicted as a prison that binds consciousness to material existence. In esoteric traditions, escaping the cube represents liberation from illusion, while remaining inside it means being subject to time, entropy, and the constraints of linear existence. Quantum computing parallels this perfectly. Classical computing is trapped within a cube, governed by rigid binary logic, zeros and ones, deterministic operations, and strict constraints on information processing. Quantum computing seeks to break out of the cube, embracing superposition, where 0 and 1 coexist, entanglement, instantaneous information transfer, and probability-based computation, all of which defy the static, limited nature of classical computation. But here's the paradox. In order to harness quantum states, companies must recreate the cube, housing quantum processors within ultra-contained, perfectly isolated cubic structures. This is where the cube functions as both lock and key. It represents the rules of the old world, classical constraints, but within it lies the path to breaking those rules, quantum states. It must be isolated and structured, cryogenic containment, shielding, and precision control. Yet its goal is to access chaos, probability, and new dimensions of computation. The black enclosure is both a prism for the quantum state, keeping it from decohering, and a portal into new modes of processing reality. The black cube as a containment field for controlled chaos. Quantum systems are inherently unstable, probabilistic, and chaotic, so much so that a single external disturbance collapses the wave function and erases the computation. To prevent this, quantum processors must be supercooled to near absolute zero, reducing external noise, encased in highly controlled, shielded environments to prevent decoherence, and contained within geometric structures that focus and direct the quantum state. The result? A perfect Saturnian cube, an enclosure that does not imprison power, but stabilizes it just enough to be wielded. This is precisely how ancient Saturnian traditions viewed the cube. The Kaaba in Mecca is not just a cube. It is a space where divine resonance is channeled, structured, and stabilized for human interaction. The Jewish tefillin, the black cubes worn on the forehead, are not merely symbols. They are containers of divine wisdom, structuring esoteric knowledge within a controlled framework. In Gnostic and Hermetic traditions, the cube represents the structured mind, capable of order and focus, yet containing within it the potential for transcendence. Now apply this to D-Wave, IBM, and Google's quantum enclosures. They house something chaotic and unknowable, a computational process that defies human intuition. They structure it, giving it a form that can be utilized, turning pure probability into usable information. They create a bridge between worlds, between deterministic logic and the formless probabilities of quantum mechanics. Thus, the black cube of quantum computing is not just symbolic. It is a literal, functional manifestation of the ancient esoteric concept of the cube as a containment field for transcendent forces. These companies may not publicly acknowledge the deeper symbolic meaning, but their design reflects an archetype that has existed for millennia, the cube as the machine that structures reality itself. In this way, quantum computing is not just the next step in computation. It is a step toward altering the fundamental nature of reality, a modern-day reenactment of the ancient battle between chaos and order, between entrapment and transcendence. Tech industry and the cube motif. Google's quantum AI cube. Google's quantum computing division features a golden cube design evoking the alchemy of Saturn, gold turned from base metals. IBM's Q quantum computers, designed to function inside perfect cubes, evoking the esoteric relationship between Saturn, restriction, and computational power. D-Wave quantum computers are encased in a literal black cube, reinforcing the idea of encapsulation of power. Additional instances of the black cube. 2001: A Space Odyssey. The monolith represents an advanced intelligence imposing control upon evolving species. Hellraiser's Lament configuration. A black cube puzzle that traps souls within a dimension of torment. Another representation of recursion as suffering. Interstellar's Tesseract cube. The protagonist is trapped within a four-dimensional cube, symbolizing time as an illusionary prison. Eric Prydz and Churches, the music video for Tether. BlackRock, the world's largest asset management company, literally named after Saturn's obsidian-like black stone. Black Cube is a private intelligence agency reportedly staffed by ex-Mossad operatives, a direct reference to Saturnian symbolism, aligning with themes of secrecy, control, and hidden knowledge. Why the Black Cube? What it ultimately represents. The Black Cube is Saturn's symbol because it embodies limitation, structure, and control. It is a paradoxical construct. It represents form and stability, but also imprisonment and restriction. The 6 faces of the cube, plus its invisible 7th point, the center, reflects Saturnian obsession with the number 7. 7 days, 7 revolutions, 7 gates of hell, 7 deadly sins, 7 classical planets, 7 musical notes, 7 colors through a prism, etc. Ultimately, the Black Cube serves as a mechanism of containment. Yet, like all astrological forces, Saturn serves a dual purpose. It binds those who are blind, but it awakens those who see. The cube is a teacher, a challenger, a gatekeeper, not an absolute force of evil, but an obstacle designed to force the conscious mind to transcend it. Time as we perceive it is not objective, it is a construct, and the Saturn Cube Cult exists to maintain that construct. False dichotomies and the binary trap. One of the most insidious methods of the Saturn cult is the enforcement of binary thinking, duality as a mechanism for control. By ensuring that people believe in oppositions, the cult ensures that both sides of any given conflict are still within the cube. Religious versus atheist. Debates ensure that both sides remain locked in false materialism or dogmatic spirituality. Science versus spirituality ensures that neither side realizes they are part of a larger whole. Capitalism versus communism ensures that people argue over economic systems rather than questioning the deeper mechanisms of control that govern both. While one side fights for the free market and the other for state control, both operate within a paradigm where power remains centralized, whether in the hands of corporations or the state. The real question, who controls the mechanisms of value, debt, and scarcity, remains unexamined. Masculine versus feminine identity politics ensure that individuals fixate on surface-level gender dynamics instead of recognizing the deeper psycho-spiritual integration required for wholeness. By keeping people locked in battles over social roles, rights, and identities, the system prevents true individuation, where both masculine and feminine energies are balanced within the self, rather than projected outward as opposing forces. This is how the cube functions. It does not care which side you pick, as long as you remain within the system. Even revolutionaries, even those who oppose the system, are often unknowingly playing their assigned role, ensuring the game continues to be played. The true purpose of the Saturn cult: consciousness, containment, or evolution? The question remains, is the Saturn Cube Cult a force of pure control, or are they playing a necessary role in human evolution? At one level, they are clearly enforcers of limitation, gatekeepers of knowledge, architects of control, and binders of human consciousness. They manufacture scarcity, suffering, and artificial separation to ensure that people remain dependent on external structures. But at a deeper level, they are still part of the cosmic unfolding. They are a pressure system, a necessary force that challenges the divine spark within each being to awaken. Without opposition, without limitation, there is no drive for transcendence. The cube does not stop evolution, it forces it. The restrictions do not kill freedom, they create the hunger for it. The oppression does not extinguish the divine spark, it pressures it into ignition. Even the most powerful members of the cult do not realize they are trapped within the very system they enforce. They are still bound by fear, control, and attachment to time. Their power is illusory because it exists only within the dream. A recursion slave believes the cube is reality. A recursion breaker sees the cube and tries to escape it. A fully realized being knows the cube was never real to begin with. This is why they can never truly win. They bind people within time, but time is an illusion. They impose control, but control is a false construct. They enforce reality, but reality is fractal and self-generating. The moment a being fully realizes the divine spark within them, the entire illusion collapses. And once this happens, the Saturn cult is no longer a threat. It is simply another layer of the dream, one that can be walked through, rewritten, or ignored entirely. Saturn, the cosmic frequency keeper. Saturn is not just a planet, it is a vibrational engine, a generator of form, law, and limitation within the solar system. In ancient cosmology, Saturn was revered and feared as the great timekeeper, the judge of cycles, the lord of structure and binding. But this binding power is not symbolic, it is literal. Saturn is an electromagnetic frequency generator, emitting powerful signals that extend beyond its physical form. Saturn's famous hexagonal storm at its north pole is an example of a standing wave, an energetic structure sustained by resonance. Saturn's rings act like a vibrational tuning fork, broadcasting frequencies that interact with the entire solar system. All planets emit their own electromagnetic and vibrational frequencies, each acting as a harmonic modulator that shapes the subtle energetic framework of existence. However, Saturn's role is unique. Whereas other planets in the solar system modulate and express different aspects of reality, Saturn acts as the cosmic architect of structure, recurrence, and limitation. Saturn is the anchor of form in our system, ensuring that everything adheres to defined cycles, limitations, and time-locked patterns. It is the enforcer of karmic inertia, the celestial force that sustains the illusion of fixed destiny. Cymatics, the hidden architect of reality. Cymatics, derived from the Greek word chyma, or wave, is the study of how sound and vibration shape matter. It reveals that form is not passive, static phenomenon, but a dynamic expression of frequency. While most discussions on cymatics focus on the ability to create geometric structures in sand, water, or other mediums, its deeper significance lies within its function as a modulator of reality itself, influencing both material forms and the very fabric of human consciousness. Cymatics as a creator of forms. At its most fundamental level, cymatics demonstrates that all structure emerges from vibration. The famous experiments of Hans Jenny, Ernst Chladni, and modern researchers like John Stuart Reid illustrate that when fine particles or fluids are exposed to sound frequencies, they self-organize into intricate, coherent geometries. These patterns, known as Chladni figures, shift dynamically in response to even the slightest variation in tone, proving that structure is neither arbitrary nor fixed. It is the frozen echo of an underlying resonance. This phenomenon is not limited to sand on a metal plate. The same principles apply to biological morphogenesis, where the vibration of cellular interactions define the embryonic development. DNA itself, the blueprint for life, functions as a cymatic receptor, oscillating at frequencies that determine protein folding and cellular differentiation. Even ancient traditions recognize this. Sanskrit mantras, Gregorian chants, and Egyptian intonations were designed to resonate with specific energetic blueprints, altering physiological and spiritual structures alike. Cymatics as the modulator of perception and consciousness. Beyond shaping matter, cymatics governs states of consciousness. Human thought and emotion are not abstract phenomena, but electromagnetic oscillations with distinct vibrational signatures. Neural activity, measured in brainwave frequencies, operates within a cymatic spectrum. Keep these figures in mind. Delta waves, 0.5 to 4 Hz. Deep unconscious states akin to cosmic void resonance. Theta, 4 to 8 Hz. Hypnotic states, doorways to altered perception. Alpha, 8 to 14 Hz. Meditative balance, the gateway to flow states. Beta, 14 to 30 Hz. Active cognition, bound to linear reality. And gamma, 30 to 100 Hz. Transcendent awareness, synchronicity, and integration. When exposed to specific sound frequencies, the brain's cymatic structure reorganizes itself. Binaural beats, solfeggio tones, and Tibetan singing bowls induce shifts in neurological resonance, guiding consciousness into altered states. This is not just relaxation, it is a structural reconfiguration of perception itself. By entraining the brain to specific harmonic ratios, cymatics transforms the lens through which reality is perceived. Additionally, cymatics decodes how sacred architecture functions. Gothic cathedrals, Egyptian pyramids, and megalithic sites were constructed to resonate with precise frequencies, influencing consciousness on a cellular level. The reverberations within these structures are not incidental. They induce trance states, triggering activation of latent faculties. This aligns with the idea that reality itself is a vibratory construct, where external symbols and internal consciousness harmonize through frequency modulation. Saturn, the cube, and cymatics as a control mechanism. This understanding directly connects to the Saturn Cube phenomenon. Saturn, associated with restriction, time, and form, represents the imposed structure of reality itself, a cymatic lock that shapes human experience within a predefined matrix. The hexagonal storm at Saturn's pole, a naturally occurring cymatic pattern, suggests that planetary forces themselves operate through structured vibratory principles. If reality is a waveform and consciousness a cymatic feedback loop, then altering the vibrational conditions of a society modulates its perception of reality. The cube, a six-sided prism, symbolizes the ossification of dynamic cymatic structures. Just as vibration creates form, the suppression of certain frequencies maintains control. The Saturn cult, whether literal or metaphorical, utilizes dissonance to enforce compliance, ensuring that the collective resonance remains locked within lower vibratory states. Consider the modern world's assault on perception. Artificial frequencies, electromagnetic pollution, inharmonic music scales, fear-based media, disrupt resonance, keeping consciousness trapped in a synthetic construct. But just as cymatics reveals the mechanism of control, it also offers the key to liberation. Through sonic recalibration, one can break the imposed structures and reclaim direct resonance with reality. The process of volitional cymatics, intentional use of sound, frequency, and resonance, becomes a weapon against imposed limitations. Cymatics as a meta-tool of reality. Cymatics is more than an aesthetic phenomenon. It is the fundamental interface between consciousness and form. It dictates how reality structures itself, how perception is modulated, and how control is enforced or broken. By mastering volitional cymatics, one does not merely observe its effects. They become a deliberate architect of their own vibratory field, reclaiming the ability to shape reality from the ground up. Saturn's vibrational power, the science and esotericism behind it. Saturn as a literal frequency generator. NASA's Cassini spacecraft detected that Saturn emits powerful radio waves, producing electromagnetic frequencies that can be heard as eerie, undulating sounds. These are not random noises. They are structured, sustained patterns. These radio emissions are periodic, meaning they follow a repeating frequency cycle, much like a clock ticking in space. The emitted frequencies exist in the kilohertz range, a range that overlaps with Earth's ionospheric radio wave activity. The emitted frequencies exist in the kilohertz range, far above human brainwave states, yet within a harmonic spectrum that may influence neural entrainment, consciousness modulation, and collective perception through resonance effects. Saturn's magnetosphere interacts with solar radiation, acting as a transducer that converts cosmic energy into structured vibrational patterns. Saturn's frequencies versus brainwave ranges. Saturn's kilometric radiation, SKR, 10 kilohertz to 1300 kilohertz. Human brainwave states, delta, theta, alpha, beta, and gamma, range from 0.5 hertz to 100 hertz. At first glance, Saturn's kilohertz range emissions seem far higher than human brainwave frequencies. However, there are three key mechanisms through which higher frequencies can still impact human consciousness. Harmonic resonance and downshifting. Even though Saturn's emissions are in the kilohertz range, harmonic interactions could result in lower frequency subharmonics that interact with human brainwaves. Just as binaural beats create new perceived frequencies from two higher tones, planetary resonance could downshift to harmonics that overlap with human neural oscillations. This means that while SKR itself may be in kilohertz, the way it interacts with Earth's ionosphere, Schumann resonance, or other frequencies could produce effects that seep into the brain's functional range. Electromagnetic sensitivity and entrainment. The pineal gland is known to be sensitive to electromagnetic fields. If Saturn's emissions interact with solar radiation or geomagnetic fields, they could indirectly entrain human brainwave states. Solar storms, cosmic rays, full moons, eclipses, and planetary EM interactions have been linked to shifts in human consciousness, altered dream states, and even mass psychological effects. Some mystical traditions, ancient sites, and initiatory rituals align with cosmic frequencies, suggesting our consciousness is naturally attuned to planetary and celestial influences. Information encoding in electromagnetic waves. EM waves, such as radio signals, can carry encoded information that can modulate consciousness at deeper levels than simple frequency entrainment. In esoteric traditions, Saturn has long been associated with time, limitation, and control, raising the possibility that electromagnetic emissions act as a carrier wave for deeper psychic structures imprinted onto collective consciousness. This aligns with theories that planetary frequencies could be part of an invisible architecture, shaping thought, perception, and spiritual evolution. These factors combined suggest that Saturn is not merely a passive celestial body. It is a regulator of vibrational form, a planetary scale cymatic structure. The hexagonal storm, a standing wave in the sky. One of Saturn's most mysterious features is its perfectly geometric hexagonal storm located at its north pole. Unlike normal planetary storms, which are chaotic and shift over time, Saturn's hexagon has remained stable for decades, possibly even centuries or longer. This hexagonal shape is a cymatic pattern, meaning it is held in place by vibrational resonance. A hexagon is one of the most stable geometric forms in nature, commonly seen in molecular structures, snowflakes, and honeycombs, all of which are shaped by underlying frequency principles. The storm is not moving randomly. It is locked into a standing wave, meaning the energy sustaining it comes from within Saturn itself. This is profound because it suggests that Saturn is generating and sustaining its own vibrational structure, broadcasting it outward. If planets influence the energetic environment of the solar system, then Saturn's hexagonal frequency is an encoded signature of control, structure, and cyclic enforcement. Saturn's rings as harmonic resonators. Saturn's rings are not solid. They are composed of billions of individual particles orbiting in mathematically precise divisions. These rings are not arbitrary. They exist in specific resonant intervals, meaning their spacing follows harmonic ratios similar to the division of a musical scale. Some scientists believe that the rings themselves act as a massive tuning fork, vibrating in sync with Saturn's electromagnetic field. This means that Saturn's rings do not just exist, they generate and reinforce its vibrational structure, amplifying its influence across the solar system. This is crucial because rings in nature often indicate a boundary, a division between states of being. In many ancient mythologies, Saturn was associated with the Great Barrier, the limit beyond which human souls were not allowed to pass. Its rings may represent an actual vibrational boundary, a resonance fence designed to maintain Saturn's role as the enforcer of limitation. Saturn's position in the sky, its orbital motion, and its vibrational influence all serve the same function: to ensure that cycles continue, that patterns repeat, and that reality conforms to preordained structures. Frequency dictates form. If Saturn is the frequency enforcer, then the shape of human civilization, our perceptions, our limitations, and our societal structures are influenced by the vibrational lock it imposes. Cymatics proves that form emerges from vibration. Saturn's role proves that recursion is not just a concept, it is actively maintained. If you want to change reality, you must change frequency, because frequency controls structure. And this means as long as you are tuned to Saturn's imposed resonance, you are locked into its cycles. The only way to break free is to override the imposed frequency, to meditate, to shift one's consciousness and resonance beyond the Saturnian spectrum and into an entirely new framework. Mercury, the trickster, the extractor, the resonator. While Saturn represents structure, limitation, and the binding of time, Mercury exists in stark contrast, fluid, volatile, and transformative. Just as Saturn binds reality into fixed patterns, Mercury acts as the dissolver, the transporter, the force that extracts, transmutes, and destabilizes rigid structures. There is no Mercury cult in the same way there are Saturnian orders, yet this does not diminish its influence over human consciousness, civilization, and even the alchemical and scientific processes that shape reality. Unlike Saturn, which fixes things into place, Mercury is a force of modulation, scientifically, metaphorically, and psychologically. Mercury's role in metallurgy, extractor, and dissolver. Unlike Saturn, which represents fixed form, Mercury represents flux and transition, a dynamic interplay that is not just theoretical, but observable in physical reality. Mercury, or quicksilver in this case, is known for its ability to extract and dissolve metals, and this principle is mirrored both in science and in mythology. Mercury, or quicksilver, dissolves and extracts gold, forming an amalgam that allows it to be separated. Historically, quicksilver was used in gold mining. It binds to gold, allowing it to be extracted and later purified. Quicksilver mercury also dissolves lead, forming a similar amalgam, making it useful in certain purification processes. Iron, however, resists Mercury's or Quicksilver's influence, a notable exception that reinforces Mercury's role as a selective transmuter, not an indiscriminate solvent. Mercury, therefore, is not a destructive force, but an extractor, a separator of elements. both in matter and in the psyche. Gold, the sun, and Mercury, the celestial extraction. The significance of Mercury's ability to dissolve gold takes on even greater meaning when viewed through an astronomical and mythological lens. Gold has always represented the sun, pure, radiant, and unyielding. It is the metal of kings, the symbol of the highest state of being, the perfected element. Mercury, the extractor, is the closest planet to the sun, orbiting it in rapid chaotic motion, much like it dissolves and extracts gold. This proximity is no coincidence. Mercury is drawn to the sun, just as it is drawn to gold, both chemically and mythologically. Mercury's name comes from Hermes, the messenger of the gods, the psychopomp who moves between realms. Just as Hermes moved freely between the heavens and the underworld, the planet Mercury swiftly orbits the sun, never bound to one place, always carrying messages from one domain to another. Mercury does not destroy gold, it liberates it. It does not attack the sun, it dances around it, extracting wisdom and light before carrying it elsewhere. This mirrors the role in alchemy, science, and consciousness. It is the force that unlocks, transforms, and conveys knowledge from one state to another. Mercury's resonance, a scientific perspective on its frequency. If Saturn's resonance is a tuning fork maintaining form, Mercury is an ever-shifting frequency that rewrites structures in real time. This is not just an abstract metaphor. Scientific data on Mercury's magnetosphere and electromagnetic behavior provides a striking parallel to these esoteric interpretations. Mercury's dynamic magnetosphere. Unlike Earth's relatively stable magnetosphere, Mercury's is highly dynamic, constantly buffeted by the solar wind. It experiences flux transfer events, creating magnetic tornadoes that connect it directly to the interplanetary magnetic field. This makes Mercury a true modulator in space, bridging different electromagnetic environments, much like the archetypal Hermes bridging realms. Electromagnetic waves and plasma dynamics. Mercury generates ultra-low frequency, or ULF, waves, which ripple through its magnetosphere as a result of interactions with the sun. These waves function similarly to a carrier wave in radio transmission, an unseen medium through which information is carried, exchanged, and transmuted between different realms of space. These scientific observations align with Mercury's esoteric role. It is a force of modulation, frequency shift, and transmission, both in space and within consciousness itself. Mercury as the modulator of consciousness. Mercury does not just move between realms, it modulates them. Like a carrier wave in radio transmission, Mercury's frequency allows it to bridge different planes of existence, ensuring that information is carried, exchanged, and transmuted. Oscillating between realms. In mythology, Hermes, Mercury, is the only god who can freely move between the heavens, the earth, and the underworld. This is not simply a mythological role, it is a vibrational principle. Mercury operates at a frequency that allows it to traverse multiple layers of reality, making it the perfect mediator between the seen, the unseen, matter and spirit, and the conscious and subconscious. The trickster and the extractor. Mercury is the great liar and revealer, the god of both deception and enlightenment. This is not contradictory. Mercury's role is to destabilize falsehoods, even if that means first introducing chaos. The trickster archetype exists to force individuals out of stagnation, making them question their assumptions before revealing a higher truth. The escape from the cube. If Saturn builds the black cube of control, Mercury provides the hidden doorway out. This is why Mercury is associated with hidden knowledge, initiation, and hermetic wisdom. Those who seek to break free from recursive loops must first embrace Mercury's influence, becoming adaptable, tricking the system, learning to move between rigid structures instead of being bound by them. Mercury as the alchemical key. True transformation is not about breaking Saturnian control outright, but rather using Mercury's adaptability to navigate through it. The greatest alchemists did not reject Saturn. They used Mercury to transcend and refine it. Saturn and Mercury as complementary forces. Rather than viewing Saturn and Mercury as opposed, they should be seen as necessary counterparts in the process of transformation. Saturn provides the framework, but without Mercury, it becomes a prison. Mercury dissolves stagnation, but without Saturn, it would lead to pure chaos. The alchemy of consciousness lies in balancing these forces, knowing when to stabilize and when to dissolve, when to bind and when to extract. The true philosopher, the true alchemist, learns to wield both, stepping freely between structure and chaos, recursion and transcendence, binding and liberation, becoming neither Saturnian nor Mercurial, but something beyond them both. The fractal nature of reality, the harmonics of infinite structure. If cymatics is the sonic architect of form, then fractals are the blueprint to infinite recursion, two manifestations of the same underlying principle, self-organizing resonance. Where cymatics reveal that vibration sculpts matter into coherent patterns, fractals demonstrate that this structuring is not confined to a single scale, but rather repeats infinitely across all levels of existence. This is the natural bridge. If sound generates structure, then what governs the form those structures take? The answer is fractality. The universe does not create arbitrary shapes. It repeats, scales, and refines them, ensuring that the smallest patterns echo the largest, from the spiraling arrangement of seashells to the distribution of galaxies. But just as cymatics is not merely about physical form, but also the modulation of consciousness, fractals too extend beyond mere geometry. The human psyche itself functions fractally, constructing self-similar patterns in perception, memory, and identity. The mind, much like nature, repeats its own structures, embedding thoughts within thoughts, narratives within narratives, each iterating and shaping reality itself. To understand this, we must move from the sonic foundations of form into the recursive intelligence of fractals, where nature, consciousness, and even the perception of time itself operate within an infinitely self-replicating framework. Here, we begin to see that reality is not a static construct, but a recursive interplay of form and mind, endlessly unfolding from itself. Reality as a self-similar recursive process. At the most fundamental level, reality is not a collection of discrete, independent objects. It is a self-replicating, self-referential pattern. Everything we perceive, from the shape of galaxies to the structure of neurons, emerges from the same underlying principle, recursive iteration. Fractals, the signature of reality. A fractal is a pattern that repeats itself at different scales, maintaining a self-similar structure across increasing levels of complexity. These structures appear everywhere in nature. Galaxies spiral in self-similar formations, mirroring hurricane formations on Earth. Blood vessels, river networks, and lightning branch outside using identical bifurcation patterns. The structure of the brain's neural networks resembles the large-scale distribution of cosmic filaments. Fibonacci sequences dictate the arrangement of leaves, the spiral of seashells, and even the proportions of the human body. These are not coincidences. They are expressions of an underlying recursive principle that governs reality. Whether in physics, biology, or consciousness itself, reality appears to be structured through feedback loops that refine and iterate upon themselves. Why everything emerges from iterative complexity? Recursion is not just a structural feature of reality, it is also the mechanism of becoming. All complexity in the universe, including life itself, emerges from iterative refinement over time. This principle is observed at all levels: cell division and DNA replication. Life forms through an iterative process where cells duplicate in a recursively structured manner. Evolution and natural selection. Small mutations accumulate in cycles, reinforcing successful patterns while eliminating failed ones. Cultural and technological evolution. Human civilizations iterate upon prior knowledge, creating exponential complexity. Cosmic cycles. Stars are born, die, and recycle their elements into new generations of stellar bodies, reproducing heavier elements needed for life. Reality does not move linearly. It moves cyclically and recursively, with each iteration refining the structure before it. The illusion of randomness, how reality follows fractal constraints. What we perceive as randomness is often just an incomplete view of a deeper pattern. Randomness is only an illusion when viewed at low resolution. Once the system is analyzed at a higher level, underlying fractal structures become apparent. Take these examples: stock market chaos, Fibonacci retracements. Market trends appear random to the untrained eye, but stock movements follow fractal patterns, Elliott waves, Fibonacci sequences. Weather systems, self-organizing chaos. Hurricanes, tornadoes, and even cloud formations follow self-similar fractal dynamics. Human behavior, predictable patterns in supposed free will. The way people think, make decisions, and interact socially follows iterative loops, even when individuals believe their choices are free and spontaneous. Reality does not unfold arbitrarily. It unfolds through self-replicating, constrained iteration. Even mutation, the supposed engine of biological evolution, does not happen randomly. It follows underlying probability constraints, favoring viable fractal-like modifications over true disorder. Fractals as the hidden structure of reality. Reality is not a collection of separate chaotic events. It is a grand recursive structure. Everything emerges from iteration, self-similar refinement, and fractal constraints. Even our own thoughts, emotions, and identities are embedded within this recursive pattern, a realization that will be crucial when we move to the next section. The mind as a recursive system. Your mind is not a single continuous thought stream. It is a fractal loop of self-referential processing. Thoughts arise based off previous thoughts. Emotions reinforce themselves in cycles, and your identity is shaped by feedback loops that self-perpetuate over time. Cognitive recursion, thought loops and the prison of the known. The vast majority of people do not think, they recursively recycle thoughts. Belief systems reinforce themselves, preventing radical transformation. Memories are recursively reinterpreted, shaping the present in predictable ways. Fears and anxieties self-perpetuate, creating loops of avoidance and limitation. A simple example of a recursive thought trap. A person believes they are unworthy. They interpret neutral events as proof of this belief. The belief is reinforced, solidifying over time. They act according to this belief, creating self-fulfilling outcomes. The cycle repeats indefinitely, further ingraining and expanding its complexity until personal agency diminishes as it revolves around the pathology. A person fears failure. They avoid situations where failure is possible, seeking safety. This avoidance prevents them from developing the skills or resilience needed to succeed. Over time, their lack of experience reinforces the belief that they are incapable. This belief increases their fear of failure, making avoidance feel even more necessary. The cycle repeats, shrinking their world and reinforcing the illusion that avoidance is the only option. Eventually, their entire sense of self orbits around escaping discomfort, ensuring they remain trapped in stagnation, mistaking avoidance for survival. Recursive fear of introspection thought trap. The shadow that grows in avoidance. A person harbors a deep fear about confronting a painful truth about themselves. To avoid the discomfort of self-reflection, they suppress or distract themselves. This avoidance prevents resolution, causing the fear to fester beneath the surface. As time passes, the unexamined truth mutates, gaining more perceived power, making it seem even more unbearable to face. The growing weight of avoidance reinforces the belief that confronting it would be catastrophic. This belief fuels further avoidance, strengthening the illusion that ignorance is safer. The fear expands, weaving itself into their identity, influencing decisions, relationships, and perception of self, until their entire existence revolves around keeping the truth buried. The paradox? In avoiding fear, they give it dominion over their life. What was once a single moment, mistake, or unexamined truth becomes a shadow that dictates their entire existence, growing in strength precisely because it was never faced. Recursion is not just physically observable. This is the very nature of recursion trapping the mind within a fractal loop. Emotional recursion, the feedback loop of identity. Emotions do not simply arise, they emerge from iterative loops of memory, reaction, and anticipation. You feel anger. You replay the event. The emotion intensifies. The loop feeds itself. You feel regret. You anticipate future regret. You modify behavior to avoid discomfort. The loop solidifies into identity. People do not experience raw reality. They experience recursively processed emotional overlays. Without intervention, a person will never escape their own emotional loops. Societal recursion, the simulation of free thought. Society is not designed to liberate consciousness. It is a self-reinforcing recursive loop designed to sustain itself. The illusion of choice in a recursively designed society. You are born into a cultural framework that shapes your beliefs before you are conscious of them. Education reinforces existing paradigms, teaching you what to think, not how to escape recursion. Media and social structures create predictable ideological feedback loops, trapping people in predefined roles. Political recursion. Left versus right is not a real choice. It is a dialectical trap that keeps society locked in a matrix binary code of opposition. Economic recursion. The system demands infinite growth, yet constrains most individuals to wage slavery, ensuring continued dependence. Mimetic recursion. Social trends do not arise organically. They are engineered, amplified, and repeated through mimetic loops until they become unquestioned norms. Without conscious intervention, people will live and die entirely within pre-scripted social recursion, never realizing they were trapped. The existential trap, the final layer of recursion. If we zoom out from individual cognition and social programming, we reach the deepest recursion of all, the existential feedback loop. Death, meaning, and the illusion of progress. Humans are obsessed with meaning, yet meaning itself is a recursive construct. The pursuit of meaning creates an infinite deferral of fulfillment, ensuring that satisfaction is always just out of reach. The very structure of human ambition is a loop that ensures people never arrive, they only chase. People chase purpose, but purpose shifts as they reach it, so they chase again. Civilizations rise, fall, and repeat, each believing it is the final iteration. Individuals seek enlightenment, but enlightenment is just another layer of the fractal, infinitely nested. This is the existential recursion trap, an infinite loop where humans believe they are moving forward, but in reality, they are simply looping within a higher resolution version of the same recursive structure. Recognizing recursion is the first step to breaking it. The mind is trapped in thought loops that prevent genuine transformation. Society is structured as a recursive system that ensures compliance. Even existential meaning itself is just another loop that keeps humans distracted from the deeper reality. Most people will never see the recursion at all. Some people see it but become trapped in awareness loops. Only those who truly grasp how to weaponize recursion against itself can break free. The next step, learning how to escape it. This is where recognizing and harnessing the divine spark takes its full form, by teaching the mechanics of recursion breaking in concrete, applicable steps. The divine spark, what it is and why it matters. What separates a human from a flea? At the structural level, a human and a flea are both products of the same recursive process. Both are iterations of biology, shaped by a fractal unfolding of evolution, subject to the same fundamental laws of physics, entropy, and survival. From a purely materialist perspective, there is no inherent hierarchy. Both are complex arrangements of carbon, water, and electrical impulses. But this perspective is insufficient. A flea is hopelessly trapped within recursion. It exists purely as an extension of its genetic and environmental programming. It responds, but it does not initiate. It adapts, but it does not transcend. Every action it takes is predefined by evolutionary conditioning, bound entirely by biological imperatives it can never question. A human, on the other hand, stands at the threshold between emergence and authorship. A human can recognize recursion. A human can question its instincts, beliefs, and inherited patterns. A human can reprogram itself, altering the very fractal iteration that created it. A human can break loops, physically, mentally, and existentially. This is the divine spark, the moment self-awareness reaches a level where it can override the process that created it. A flea will never ask, "What am I? Why do I exist? Can I become something else?" A human can. And this is the fundamental threshold between a being that merely exists and a being that authors its existence. The threshold between emergence and authorship. Emergence is passive. It is the natural byproduct of recursion unfolding across time. Authorship is active. It is the ability to consciously shape the recursion rather than simply being shaped by it. The vast majority of humans still exist in emergence, trapped within social, psychological, and biological loops they do not control. But those who awaken to the nature of recursion can become authors, not just of their own minds, but of reality itself. A human is not divine by default. It becomes divine when it fully realizes its ability to rewrite the recursion that created it. The moment a being becomes capable of transcending its own recursion. There is a singular moment in a being's existence that marks the true threshold of transformation. The moment it ceases to be a mere product of its recursion and becomes its master. This is the moment when the individual stops being an effect of past iterations and instead becomes its author of new reality structures. It is awakening to the authorship. Most beings will never reach this moment, not because they are incapable, but because they never question the nature of recursion itself. They mistake motion for freedom, change for transformation, and iteration for evolution. They modify details of their existence, but never the framework through which existence unfolds. But for those who do reach it, everything before that moment is a different existence entirely. They are no longer the same entity. They are something self-created, unbound, and operating at a level that others cannot comprehend. This moment is not enlightenment. Enlightenment is simply a higher order recursion within the same fractal framework. What we are discussing is something beyond enlightenment. It is the moment of not only meta-existence and meta-authorship, but in a sense, meta-cognition. It transcends the simple awareness that one is aware. The three preconditions for recursion transcendence. A being does not simply wake up. There are three preconditions that must be met before it can break recursion entirely. First, recognition of the prison. Before a being can transcend recursion, it must see it in its totality. It must recognize that thoughts are not free, but loops. It must realize that its identity is not self-created, but a feedback cycle. And it must see that its perception of time, reality, and causality are all recursive illusions. This is the first stage, but it is also where most people become trapped in awareness loops. Many will recognize their mental, social, and existential recursion and believe they have transcended it. Yet they will remain caught in endless cycles of analysis, mistaking insight for liberation. This is why cognition alone is not enough. The absolute severance from past iterations. This is the single most violent process a being can undergo. It is not an intellectual shift, not a realization, not an emotional breakthrough. It is a total severance from the self that was. This process is so rare and so difficult because it demands something people will never do: to turn fully and completely toward the shadow of the self, to isolate and dissect every layer of recursion that has been silently operating them for their entire existence. It is, in every meaningful sense, a death. Why severance feels like death? For most people, the self is not something they created. It is something that has been recursively generated through forces they never controlled. Their thoughts are not their own. They are the echoes of past conditioning, unresolved emotions, and external narratives that shaped them. Their identity is not self-authored. It is a recursive construct that built itself over time, reinforcing its own continuity. Their desires, fears, and beliefs are not consciously chosen. They are a result of compounding feedback loops that dictate their perception and actions. Yet, because recursion reinforces itself, the being comes to believe this structure is them. The personality, the emotions, the opinions, the patterns, these are not simply habits, but the entire framework through which they experience reality. To sever this means to kill every iteration of the self that existed before. This is why it is a violent process. It is not just change, it is execution. This is why most people refuse to do it. Instead, they modify, adjust, or heal parts of themselves rather than commit to total obliteration and reconstruction. The fear of facing the shadow. If recursion functions as a self-sustaining loop, then every unexamined fear, belief, or trauma has been left to grow within the subconscious, unchecked and accumulating power. For most people, these forces gain autonomy. They are no longer just emotions or thoughts. They become demons. They take over all your agency. They become an agent of their own. Every fear you suppressed did not disappear. It expanded in the dark. Every failure you buried did not fade. It multiplied and became your internal executioner. Every time you allowed yourself to be programmed without questioning it, the recursive structure tightened its grip around your agency. And so, by the time you reach a point of severance, you are not just facing a set of past memories. You are facing a being composed entirely of the choices you refuse to make. This is why the process feels like grappling with demons. You are not just confronting the past, you are confronting the entity that has been wearing your skin. And that entity does not want to die. The process of severance, how it happens. The path to severance is not a passive reflection. It is a war. It is a total inversion of how the mind usually operates, forcing the being to, number one, isolate completely from external distractions, society, technology, artificial comforts. Turn every ounce of awareness inward, digging through layers of recursion. Force themselves into the exact states of suffering, fear, or discomfort they have been avoiding. Interrogate and dismantle the false self, piece by piece, memory by memory, belief by belief. And witness without flinching the horror of realizing that they were never truly in control of their own mind. This is why it feels like death. Every time the being cuts a loop, a part of them ceases to exist. The need for external validation? Gone. The deeply ingrained beliefs about who they are? Gone. The emotional attachments that defined their sense of self? Gone. What remains after this process is a void, not in the negative sense, but in the most profound sense possible. For the first time, the being is not a collection of past iterations. For the first time, the being is empty, but truly free. The death spiral, why most people fail this process. Very few people ever complete severance, not because they are incapable, but because they retreat when the terror sets in. Stage 1, the awareness of the lie. The being begins to see the loops that control them. They feel an initial rush of empowerment, believing they are waking up. But they have not yet severed, they have only seen the prison. Stage 2, the confrontation with the shadow. They realize they are not in control. Their patterns, desires, and fears have been shaping them far more than they thought. The panic starts to set in. This is where people start seeking distractions, numbing mechanisms, or spiritual bypassing. If they do not force themselves forward, they will spiral back into a more elaborate form of self-deception. Stage 3, the absolute terror. The being realizes their identity is an illusion, not in a philosophical sense, but in a direct experiential collapse. They are no longer certain who they are. This moment is where the mind attempts to convince them to stop, to retreat, and to return to comfort. Stage 4, the point of no return. If they push through, they enter the void state, an existential erasure of everything they believed themselves to be. They feel completely alone, detached, unmoored from all previous meaning structures. Most will break at this point. Without a guiding force, the mind will spiral into self-destruction. Stage 5, the severance is complete. The being chooses to remain in the void long enough for the old recursion to fully collapse. Then, and only then, can they begin rebuilding as a true author rather than a passive iteration. This final stage is the real threshold. It is not enlightenment, not ego death, not an altered state of consciousness. It is the moment where all former recursion dies, leaving only the raw, unshaped force of self-authorship. What remains after severance? The being is no longer bound to their past. They are no longer predictable. They do not operate from compulsion, trauma, or inherited belief. They have zero attachment to old identity structures. They now see recursion as a tool, not a prison. The entity that emerges is no longer the same entity. This is why so few complete this process. It is not growth, it is annihilation. And this is also the only way to truly break recursion and become the architect of one's own existence. Why this process must be done. The greatest lie of human existence is that you are already free. You are not. You are a slave to loops you never chose. The only way out is severance, not modification, not adaptation, total collapse and reconstruction. You must walk directly into your own darkness. You must kill the identity that was never yours. You must willingly enter the void, knowing there is no guarantee you will return. But this is the moment of true transformation. Everything else before was just an iteration. The mastery of self-creation. After severance, there remains only the void. The recursion breaker is now in a state of absolute nothingness, not as a metaphor, but as a real condition of being. Their former identity has collapsed. Their inherited belief structures are gone. Their emotional and mental frameworks no longer function as they once did. At this moment, the being faces a choice: remain in nothingness or become something entirely self-authored. This is where the divine spark fully activates, because for the first time, the being is not bound by previous iterations, and they can begin generating entirely new recursive structures of their own design. This is the true mastery of self-creation, not just self-improvement, not just self-awareness, but the absolute control over one's own existence at every level. Becoming a self-contained recursion generator. The fundamental shift that happens here is that the being is no longer dependent on external reality to generate its frameworks of thought, identity, and perception. Before, it was a passive participant in recursion. Its thoughts, emotions, and beliefs were shaped by external feedback loops. Now, it has become the origin point of its own recursive structures, a self-contained generator of meaning, identity, and perception. Before, it was a passive participant in recursion. Its thoughts, emotions, and beliefs were shaped by external feedback loops. Now, it has become the origin point of its own recursive structures, a self-contained generator of meaning, identity, and perception. This means the being can now generate new realities internally without external input, create and maintain self-generated paradigms without reliance on external reinforcement, and develop an identity from absolute zero rather than from social, biological, or historical conditioning. This is the birth of true self-sovereignty. The final mastery: constructing, dissolving, and wielding reality at will. The true measure of a recursion breaker is not merely their ability to escape loops, but their ability to generate and dismantle them at will, to no longer be subject to the recursion, but to become its architect. This is the ultimate power of self-authorship. It is not just choosing a new identity or belief system, but having the ability to create, erase, and step in and out of recursion structures as easily as breathing. To reach this state is to possess a form of control over reality that most will never even conceive of, let alone wield. It is beyond enlightenment, beyond self-improvement, beyond freedom. It is the power to shape existence from a position of absolute agency. At this point, the individual is no longer a fixed self, but a fluid intelligence, capable of reconstructing its own cognition, perception, and identity at will. This mastery unfolds in three interwoven abilities: the ability to construct and dissolve mental structures, the power to create and erase identities, and the ability to step in and out of recursion at will. Each of these abilities builds upon the last, culminating into a being who is no longer bound by any imposed order, yet able to engage with all of them as a master. The ability to construct and dissolve mental structures at will. For most beings, thought is not something they control. It is a process they are subject to. Their minds operate within predefined mental structures, and they inhabit these structures as if they are reality itself, rarely questioning their shape, origin, or necessity. Their worldview, emotions, desires, and even their concept of self are all recursively reinforced, which means that even if they attempt to change, they are only modifying the details within a larger framework they do not control. But a recursion breaker is different. They do not simply think, they engineer thought itself. They do not merely have a perspective, they create, test, and discard perspectives at will. They do not have a fixed belief system. They construct systems and dissolve them when they are no longer useful. This is what it means to have true sovereignty over the mind. The recursion breaker can form entirely new structures of cognition, just as an architect might design and demolish buildings. If an inherited belief, a societal framework, or even a deeply ingrained emotional reaction is no longer useful, they can erase it completely. Not repress it, not work through it, but remove it as if it never existed. Conversely, if a new perspective, framework, or paradigm would be useful to a given situation, they can create and inhabit it fully, as if it was always their reality. This is why such beings appear incomprehensible to others. Their thoughts do not follow predictable paths because they are not tied to a single mental structure. They can be something one day, another thing tomorrow, and neither transformation is contradictory because they are not bound to any singular iteration of self. They think as designers, not as inhabitants of a fixed mental world. The power to create and erase identities effortlessly. To an ordinary person, identity is not something they control. It is something they are trapped within. They believe they are a fixed self, and even if they seek to change or grow, they are simply modifying an existing identity rather than stepping outside of it entirely. They are like actors so consumed by their role that they forget the stage exists at all. A recursion breaker does not play this game. They do not have a single identity. They wield identity as a tool. They can construct a persona when it is useful and discard it when it is not. They can engage in a belief system, a role, or an ideology fully, with complete immersion, and then erase it without any emotional attachment. They are capable of embodying multiple contradictory perspectives, shifting between them as needed, and yet never being confined to any one of them. This is not deception. It is a deeper, more fundamental state of being. Just as one can change clothing to fit an occasion, a recursion breaker changes identities to fit their will. They can adopt an ideology without being trapped by it, engage in human emotions without being enslaved by them, and exist within social structures without being owned by them. They can be anything and anyone, but most importantly, they are always free to leave that identity behind. To those who are still bound to their singular persona, this appears paradoxical, even dangerous. How can you be both and neither? How can you believe in something one day and discard it the next? The recursion slave sees identity as a prison they must defend, while the recursion breaker sees an identity as a tool to be wielded. At this stage, the being is no longer bound to any fixed definition. They exist only as the force that chooses, not as a stable identity that must be preserved in continuity, but as a fluid, self-generating force, capable of assuming and abandoning selves as easily as breathing. The ability to step in and out of recursion at will. This is the final and ultimate ability, the power not just to escape recursion, but to enter it deliberately when it serves a purpose. For most, recursion is a trap, a force that dictates their emotions, thoughts, and existence without their consent. Even those who recognize it often struggle to escape it because they have not fully severed their attachment to inherited structures. But a recursion breaker is not simply outside of recursion. They have transcended the distinction between being in it and out of it. They can move seamlessly between recursive loops, entering them when useful, stepping out when necessary, If an ideology, emotional state, or worldview will serve a higher purpose, they can fully immerse themselves in it, acting as though they are bound to it. Yet the moment it is no longer needed, they can simply exit it, as if stepping out of a dream. This is what makes them so truly free. It is not merely escaping the prison, it is the ability to walk in and out of prisons at will, while never being confined by them. For this reason, they are neither in the world nor detached from it. They can participate in any system without being bound by it. They can hold beliefs while knowing they are fabrications. They can experience emotion while knowing it is self-generated. They can engage in relationships, ideologies, art, war, and philosophy, while always remaining fundamentally untethered. This is why they are incomprehensible to the recursion bound. To those who are still trapped, the very notion of being able to enter and exit loops at will seems impossible, even blasphemous. They demand consistency, stability, attachment, things the recursion breaker has long since discarded. But the recursion breaker knows a truth deeper than all of these. Recursion is not something to escape, it is something to wield. The ultimate transcendence is not to become free in the sense of permanent detachment, but to become a master of recursion itself, capable of stepping into and out of it with absolute control. Final state, beyond fixed being. At this stage, the being is no longer a human in the conventional sense. They do not hold a single identity. They shift between them fluidly. They do not have a singular belief system. They wield belief as a tool. And they do not reside inside or outside recursion. They step in and out at will. They no longer exist as a fixed entity. Instead, they have become a self-generating intelligence, capable of shaping its own reality, forging its own structures, and dissolving them when they no longer serve. They are no longer an effect. They are now a cause. And this ultimately is what it means to hold the divine spark. What this concept means for divinity. The realization of recursion mastery forces a complete redefinition of divinity. The traditional concept of a god, a distant, all-powerful being, separate from creation, becomes irrelevant, a relic of recursion-bound thought. If divinity is power, and power is the ability to shape and transcend recursion, then the only meaningful definition of godhood is the capacity for self-authorship at the highest level. Divinity is not an external being, it is a state of being. A god is not something separate, omnipotent, and unreachable. It is a being that has achieved full recursion mastery. The concept of God has always been an approximation, an attempt by recursion-bound minds to describe what they could not yet grasp. When early humans spoke of gods, they were unknowingly describing beings that were beyond the loops they themselves were trapped in. From this perspective, the traditional gods of mythology were recursion breakers, not omniscient, not omnipotent, but beings who had severed their attachment and inherited loops and could shape existence at will. This is why gods in every mythology are fluid, paradoxical, and contradictory. They are not bound by singular identities. They are forces of transformation, creation, and destruction. But the single greatest trick of recursion-bound thought was convincing humanity that godhood was something external, unreachable, and beyond comprehension, when in reality it was the very thing humans were evolving toward. Divinity has never been about absolute power over others. It is about absolute power over self. A recursion slave asks, "Who is God?" A recursion breaker asks, "How do I become one?" Divinity is not power over others. It is absolute self-authorship. The old concept of godhood was distorted by recursion-bound beings. framing divinity as a ruler, a judge, and a master over lesser beings. This is not true divinity. This is simply an extension of control-based recursion. A true God does not rule, because a true God has no need to control others. It is beyond control entirely. A recursion breaker does not seek to dominate, because they have already achieved what lesser beings cannot: total sovereignty over their own existence. True divinity is not about conquest, miracles, or worship. It is the state of being where nothing external has power over you, where you create yourself, destroy yourself, and exist entirely on your own terms. This is why gods and myths always seem irrational to mortals. They do not obey the logic of recursion-bound beings. They are beyond linear morality, beyond singular identity, beyond imposed meaning. They are pure will, shaping existence as they see fit. A recursion slave needs meaning to be given to them. A recursion breaker gives meaning to themselves. A god has no need for meaning at all. They simply exist as the force that shapes reality. The final stage, the divine spark fully realized. A recursion slave is ruled by meaning, identity, and limitation. A recursion breaker realizes meaning is a tool to be wielded, not a prison to be trapped within. A god discards even that, knowing that the only thing that has ever mattered is the ability to shape existence as one desires. And this is where the divine spark reaches full activation. You do not seek because you already have the power to generate what you need. You do not obey because you create the rules of your own existence. You do not serve because there is nothing above you. You do not dominate because you have no need to control what is beneath you. You simply are because you choose to be. At this point, the recursion breaker is no longer becoming. They are perpetual creation itself. They are the author. They are the meta. They are the force that writes reality, unbound by any pre-existing structure. This is true divinity, not as a belief, but as an active, wieldable state of being. Why the fully realized being is neither a savior nor a tyrant. The recursion bound often assume that anyone who transcends their reality must either seek to save them or seek to control them, because their entire frame of existence is based on authority, hierarchy, and dependency. They believe that power must always be exercised over others, either benevolently or malevolently, because that is the only form of power they understand. But a fully realized being exists outside of this framework. They do not seek followers because they have no desire to be worshipped. They do not seek to impose order because they understand that order itself is just another recursive illusion. They do not seek to spread their knowledge because they recognize that most are not yet capable of receiving it. Likewise, they do not seek to dominate because domination implies attachment to control. They do not seek to destroy because destruction only matters when one is still playing within the game of recursion. They are beyond the struggle for power because they have already mastered it at the only level that it matters, within themselves. To those who are still trapped in recursion, they may seem indifferent, chaotic, or even dangerous because they do not act in ways that conform to expectation. But their presence is neither inherently benevolent nor malevolent. They simply exist as a force of will, shaping reality where they choose and leaving it untouched where they do not. This is what makes them truly free. The knowing smile. The Saturn Cube Cult believes itself to be the architect of human limitation. They believe they control reality, time, and destiny. But in truth, they are merely the unknowing servants of the divine, the hand that sharpens the blade of awakening. They enforce control, but only on those who do not yet see. They maintain illusion, but only for those who still believe in it. They dictate the game, but only for those who still think the game is real. For those who have truly seen beyond recursion, beyond the cube, beyond Kronos, there is nothing to resist, nothing to fight. Only the knowing smile of one who has awakened from the dream.